exploring the wild, gay history of the YMCA. The YMCA built for prayer, fitness, and brotherhood. But behind that wholesome image, a wild and surprisingly queer history that no one really talks about. Picture it: young men sharing dorm rooms, swimming naked in church-run pools, and spending nights in bunkhouses for moral guidance. The place was meant to shape Christian character, but it also created one of the few spaces where men could be close touch and talk without judgment. For some, it was friendship. For others, it became something more. By the early 1900s, the rumors were everywhere, and some of them were true. The YMCA accidentally built one of history's first safe havens for queer connection. So how did a Christian gym turn into a cultural icon of gay history? Let's find out. Tell me the exact time you're watching morning workout or midnight scroll. If this one surprised you, tap like so the next story dives even deeper. The YMCA wasn't born in a gym. It was born in loneliness. You're in London, 1844. A city swelling with smoke sermons and strangers. The Industrial Revolution has packed the streets with young men who've left their villages for factory jobs and found, instead of opportunity, something quieter and colder: boredom, temptation, and endless fog. The nights feel longer when you've got no one to talk to and nowhere to go but the tavern or the cheap lodging house. So a young draper named George Williams, age 22, looks around his boarding room and decides that something's missing. Something moral, something social, something to make these men behave. He gathers 11 friends in a tiny back room on St. Paul's churchyard and creates what he calls the Young Men's Christian Association. The goal is simple: protect faith, build character, and keep idle hands away from sin. It's the kind of idea that sounds pure enough to make Victorian angels hum approval. But the city's reality doesn't change overnight. You can almost hear the clatter of boots outside, the hiss of carriage wheels, the muffled noise of laughter spilling from pubs. London is alive, loud, and full of contradictions. Even as the YMCA promises moral salvation, the air smells of something entirely different: sweating and secrecy. You picture the first YMCA rooms: dim lamps, plain wooden beds, a Bible on every nightstand. The men pray together before sleep, read scripture by candlelight, and talk softly about redemption. But they're still human. They still laugh, tease, wrestle, and sometimes linger too long in conversation. There's something strangely intimate about it all, an attempt to sanctify loneliness that ends up inevitably making men very close indeed. It's not that George Williams meant for the YMCA to become what it later symbolized. He was a sincere man, a Methodist who believed salvation could be structured like a scheduled Bible study at 7 prayer meeting at 8 lights out by 10. But in trying to regulate everything, he accidentally built the perfect space for connection. Hundreds of young men under one roof, far from family, working all day, sleeping side by side in narrow cots. What could possibly go wrong? The YMCA spreads faster than factory smoke. Within 10 years, branches appear across Europe, Canada, and the United States. Each one promises safety for the soul and shelter for the body. You can almost see the posters: a clean bed, a clear mind, a Christian heart. But even then, some residents joke that YMCA really stands for Young Men's Chance Association. A few newspaper columnists notice the oddity of it all. The intensity of the brotherhood, the way these dorms create their own little worlds of devotion and desire. Of course, nobody says it aloud. Not yet. Victorian England is a place where certain subjects are locked away behind lace curtains. But you can read between the lines. The early YMCA attracts men who are shy, bookish, idealistic, often displaced men who crave belonging more than adventure. They form study circles, sing hymns in harmony, and write each other letters that sound suspiciously tender for being brotherly. If you've ever stayed in a college dorm, you already understand how fast the line between platonic and personal can blur in tight quarters. The same jokes, the same rivalries, the same awkward intimacy of shared spaces. It's timeless. The difference here is that it's all wrapped in the language of salvation. The moral cover makes closeness acceptable, even holy. A brother in Christ becomes a phrase that can mean almost anything depending on how long you hold the word brother. There's an irony in how the YMCA preaches self-control, but encourages vulnerability. Men pray about their temptations together, confess their doubts, sometimes even hold hands during devotion. The founders think they're building moral discipline. What they've actually built is emotional transparency, a new kind of social intimacy that doesn't exist anywhere else in the rigid Victorian world. You can imagine George Williams watching his movement grow, probably proud and unaware of the undercurrents forming beneath the hymns. It's the same story that happens with so many reformers. You set out to save people from sin, and they find something more human instead. As night falls in London, the YMCA dormitories glow with lamplight. You can almost hear the murmurs behind the doors, men talking quietly about work, faith, loneliness, and the lives they left behind. Somewhere in that mix of sincerity and repression, a new kind of connection is being born. You step outside onto the foggy street and look back at the modest sign above the doorway, Young Men's Christian Association. The letters look ordinary, but something about them hums with unintended electricity. The men inside are looking for God, yes, but also for one another. The hymn echoes faintly through the walls, "Nearer, my God, to thee." You pause for a moment, realizing that, for some, this is the closest they'll ever get to feeling seen. By morning, the fog is lifted a little, and you step back inside the early YMCA, where the smell of soap and porridge lingers in the hallways. The dormitory feels like a monastery crossed with a boarding school. Everything neat, orderly, and strangely tender in its restraint. Rows of narrow iron beds line the room, each with a folded blanket, a Bible, and maybe a photograph tucked under the pillow. You sit on one of the cots. The mattress squeaks like it's trying to keep secrets. Around you, the other residents get dressed, brushing their hair, straightening collars, adjusting ties. They trade jokes about sermons and socks, and one of them starts singing a hymn just off key enough to make everyone laugh. For a place built on religious discipline, it feels oddly alive. The YMCA founders wanted to build moral fortresses, but what they created feels more like a club for the lonely. Imagine being a 20-year-old clerk from Manchester, working 12 hours a day, eating alone, then coming back to this dozens of young men reading, praying, talking late into the night. It's easy to see why the Y felt like salvation. The slogan might as well have been beds, Bibles, and brotherhood. The moral tone is strict, almost theatrical. Alcohol is banned, gambling condemned, dancing suspicious. But beneath the hymns and handshakes, you can sense another kind of energy, a quiet longing that doesn't quite fit the script. It's in the way conversations linger, the way laughter sounds softer after lights out, the way the word brotherhood starts to mean more than fellowship. You notice how the dormitory's design encourages connection, shared washrooms, communal meals, open reading rooms. Privacy doesn't exist here. Everything about the building assumes that constant togetherness equals purity. Ironically, that's exactly what makes the Y so intimate. You might think this kind of emotional closeness was rare in the 19th century, but it wasn't. Men in Victorian England were encouraged to form passionate friendships, writing letters full of devotion, clasping hands in public, even sleeping side by side during travel. It wasn't scandalous. It was sentimental. The YMCA simply bottled that spirit and gave it walls, rules, and a membership card. As you walk through the hall, a young man named Thomas, a tailor's apprentice, waves you over. He talks about how grateful he is to have Christian company instead of worldly distractions. But his voice trembles when he says it. You see how his hand lingers when he pats another member's shoulder. He doesn't seem aware of it, or maybe he does. The line between piety and affection is blurry here, beautifully blurry. At evening prayers, the dorm fills with voices singing in unison. The harmonies bounce off the stone walls, deep and resonant. You close your eyes, and for a moment it feels less like worship and more like yearning something ancient, wordless and human. It's a sound that binds everyone together, not through doctrine, but through shared ache. Afterward, when the lamps go out, you lie in your bed, listening to whispers. Someone's laughing softly 2 bunks away. Someone else is telling a story about his hometown. A few more words, a muffled good night, and then silence. But it's not a lonely silence. It's warm, alive, filled with presence. You think of how George Williams dreamed of saving men from temptation, but perhaps what they needed saving from wasn't sin. It was isolation. The city outside offered endless noise, but no connection. Inside the Y, at least, there was closeness, even if it came wrapped in prayer. The next day, you find a small notice pinned to the board. Volunteers needed for the new reading room. You sign your name, half curious, half hopeful. When you walk in that evening, you find a dozen men hunched over newspapers sharing coffee and conversation. The talk moves easily from scripture to sports to politics, and you can tell this is where friendships start. The air hums with that delicate balance of sincerity and flirtation that can only exist when everyone pretends it's just fellowship. One of them jokes, "We might as well live here forever." The others laugh, but you know what he means. For some, the YMCA isn't just housing, it's home safety, a small rebellion against the city's indifference. It's easy to romanticize this, to imagine the Y as a paradise of camaraderie and acceptance. But it wasn't that simple. The moral code was rigid, and anyone who stepped outside its boundaries risked everything: membership, reputation, livelihood. Still, there's something quietly revolutionary about what's happening here. Men learning to be emotional in a world that told them not to be. You lie awake that night, the candle flickering on your desk. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's toll midnight. You listen to the soft rhythm of breathing around you, dozens of strangers sharing the same air, the same loneliness, the same fragile hope that maybe belonging is holy too. By the time you return to the Y a few years later, the smell of starch and ambition has changed. The dorms still hum with prayer and small talk, but now there's something new in the air. Chalk, dust, leather, and the faint echo of dumbbells hitting the floor. The YMCA has discovered muscles. It started with a phrase that sounds harmless enough: muscular Christianity, a movement born out of 19th century anxiety. The fear that faith had gone soft, that religion had become too much lace and not enough backbone. The Victorians decided that saving the soul was good, but saving the body was holier still. So the Y built gyms and swimming halls and shower rooms that steamed like cathedrals. You step into one of these early gymnasiums, and the scene is hypnotic. Rows of young men in linen shorts lifting barbells, stretching climbing ropes that dangle from beams like vines. The air is thick with sweat, effort, and purpose. Every movement is a prayer of motion. Every breath, a declaration that morality can be sculpted into biceps. On paper, it's all about discipline building Christian manliness through sport. But you can't help noticing how physical devotion and visual admiration tend to overlap. A preacher might call it the glory of God's creation. Yet there's something in the way their eyes linger during calisthenics that doesn't feel entirely theological. This new focus turns the Y into a cultural powerhouse. Gymnasiums multiply across Europe and America. Swimming pools become social centers. The same men who once knelt at chapel benches now race across basketball courts the sport invented inside a YMCA in 1891 by James Naismith, a theology teacher who thought a good game might keep the boys out of trouble. It worked, though perhaps not in the way he intended. Because what happens when you put hundreds of men together in a place that celebrates their bodies, rewards teamwork, and offers showers afterward? You can probably guess. The Y's reputation for brotherly bonding deepens and complicates. Moral reformers applaud its physical vigor. Artists and writers decades later will see something else entirely. Still, the men here don't think in modern labels. They just know the Y feels freer than the factory floor or the family pew. They push themselves until their arms tremble, slap each other on the back, and laugh through the exhaustion. A few stay late to spot one another under the dim glow of gaslight, lifting until the rest of the world fades out. One instructor, Ralph Barrett, writes home about how exercise brings him closer to God. When we train our bodies together, we train our hearts together. He means it sincerely. But read that line a century later, and you might smile. Intentions aside, the Y is becoming one of the first places in modern history where male intimacy can exist openly under a moral pretext. You walk through the locker room after hours. The echoes are soft water, dripping laughter from behind a curtain, the sound of skin against tile. There's nothing scandalous about it on the surface. It's just men existing in shared space, unguarded for once. But underneath, there's a sense that something deeper, something unnamed is forming. Outside the gym, a sign reads, "Strong in body, pure in heart." It's meant as moral instruction. To you, it sounds almost like irony, because purity in this place doesn't come from distance, it comes from connection. Later that evening, the men gather in the common room, still damp from showers, wrapped in towels, reading scripture and newspapers side by side. Someone quotes Corinthians about the body being a temple. Another jokes, "Then we must be its caretakers." Laughter breaks out soft and knowing. If George Williams could see this, he might frown, or maybe he'd understand. After all, the same faith that built chapels also built bodies, and the same loneliness that led men to pray also led them to seek warmth. The Y didn't create those contradictions. It simply gave them a roof. As the lights dim, you linger by the doorway. The rhythmic squeak of gym ropes fades into silence. Tomorrow they'll rise early again, pray, train, eat, and work. To an outsider, it all looks perfectly moral. But to you standing there in the fading lamplight, it looks like something more complicated, more human, and maybe in its own quiet way, more honest. YMCA crossed the Atlantic. It carried both its Bible and its secrets in the same suitcase. You're on a steamship bound for New York, the deck slick with salt and ambition. It's the 1850s, and America is booming with railroads, factories, and restless young men looking for work. The air smells like iron smoke and opportunity, plus the faint moral panic that always follows youth and freedom too closely. By the time you reach the harbor, the skyline bristles with church steeples and tenements. New York's lower districts are already crowded with immigrants, sailors, and shop clerks, thousands of men sleeping in cheap lodging houses, drinking away paychecks, and praying for something better. Enter the YMCA fresh from London, promising to make Christian gentlemen out of industrial chaos. The first American branch opens in Boston in 1851, followed quickly by others in New York, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. Their mission saves souls by providing beds, meals, and wholesome recreation. You step into one of the early American Ys, and it's like stepping into moral architecture, brick walls, polished floors, a chapel upstairs, a reading room downstairs. The sign at the entrance reads, "No swearing, no gambling, no women after hours." It's a strange mix of discipline and democracy. Rich donors fund the buildings, but the residents, clerks, tailors, students come from every background. Here, you're not judged by your family name, but by your cleanliness, your punctuality, and your willingness to attend Sunday service. It's Victorian morality repackaged for the American dream. At night, the Y's dormitory fills with the same sounds you remember from London. Snoring, laughter, whispers. Only now there's more freedom in the air, a rawness that feels uniquely American. The moral tone is still strict, but the geography changes the energy. Cities like Chicago and San Francisco become Y strongholds, part hostel, part church, part fraternity. And like any fraternity, it develops its own rituals. Shared workouts, late-night discussions, and what the newspapers of the day politely call strong bonds of male friendship. Some local pastors worry about this closeness. Others praise it as spiritual brotherhood. You begin to realize that the language of virtue is often the same language people use to describe intimacy. They just change the lighting. You meet a resident named William Sloan, a young office clerk who's been living at the New York YMCA for 6 months. He tells you how the Y saved him from temptations of the city. But when he talks about his roommates, how they read to each other at night, shared their troubles, and once took a trip upstate to go swimming, you see a different kind of salvation happening. It's not about avoiding sin. It's about finding connection in a world that sells loneliness. The YMCA's growth explodes after the Civil War. Thousands of soldiers return home, broken, jobless, displaced, and the Y offers them food, shelter, and purpose. Its dormitories fill again, its mission expands, and soon it becomes one of the most powerful social organizations in America. By the 1880s, YMCAs are opening in nearly every major city, and each one becomes a hub of male life. And that's where the irony sharpens. The Y is meant to protect morality, but it also creates the perfect recipe for emotional intensity isolation, youth shared, living shared faith. Picture the scene: 100 men kneeling shoulder to shoulder at morning prayer, then heading to work, then back to eat, bathe, and sleep together under the same roof. It's devotion by design, whether to God or something harder to define. A few reformers notice this and grow uneasy. One newspaper warns that the YMCA's close domestic arrangements might encourage unwholesome attachments. Another pamphlet frets that room sharing may lead to undue familiarity. But the Y brushes it off. Brotherhood, after all, is its brand. Meanwhile, artists and writers begin romanticizing the Y's aesthetic clean rooms, crisp linens, hard work, and healthy bodies. Painters sketch the gymnasiums. Poets praise the purity of camaraderie. Decades later, those images will return in ways the founders never imagined, on postcards, photographs, and yes, eventually, in disco songs. But for now, it's all whispers and winks, nothing more. You pass through the Y's new Manhattan headquarters one evening. The lobby buzzes with conversation. Clerks in shirt sleeves talk about baseball. A few men play piano in the corner. Upstairs, you hear the faint rhythm of a handball game. The walls are lined with Bible verses, "Be strong and of good courage." You smile at the double meaning. By midnight, the hall quiets. Lamps dim, voices fade. Somewhere in the dormitory, someone coughs. Another laughs softly in his sleep. You lie awake, listening to the rhythm of the city outside, the distant clatter of carriage wheels, the muffled hum of Broadway. And you realize the Y has become something rare, a space where men can exist together without explanation. It's not rebellion. It's refuge. A place where morality and longing share the same address. The next morning, you watch the men file out for work, each one carrying the same small satchel, the same faint smile. You think of George Williams again, the draper's son from London, who dreamed of saving souls. He did in a way, just not exactly the way he planned. By the 1910s, the YMCA's empire of morality has gone fully modern, newer buildings, better gyms, and an entire architecture of virtue. Marble lobbies, stained glass tiled showers, and swimming pools that look like they were built for angels who happen to be on swim teams. You step inside one of these American YMCAs, and it's clear the age of muscular Christianity has evolved into something even more intimate. And that's where you find yourself, between the echo of laughter and the slap of wet feet inside the locker room. The air smells like soap and steam. Water glistens on white tile, and somewhere behind a curtain, a radio crackles faintly with jazz. It's the early 20th century, when the idea of physical health is next to godliness. Men gather here not just to work out, but to belong, to scrub off the city, the noise, and whatever moral grime the world leaves behind. They stretch, joke, splash, argue about baseball. Towels snap like punctuation. Everything looks innocent, almost wholesome. But you can feel the unspoken rhythm beneath it. There's something about shared routine, about vulnerability made public, that turns the Y's locker rooms into laboratories of subtle trust. You lean against a bench, listening to two men compare swim times. One, a war veteran named Henry, talks about the YMCA huts he used during the Great War. Clean cots, hot coffee, and men who understood you, without words. His tone says more than his words. The other nods slowly, drying his face with a towel that hangs too long, as if buying time. In this new tiled universe, intimacy hides in plain sight. No one calls it that, of course. They call it brotherhood, camaraderie, morale. But watch long enough, and you'll see the quiet looks exchanged across the pool. The faint blush after a compliment, the way hands linger when offering soap. The Y's rules of conduct are strict on paper. But human nature has never been much for paperwork. The 1920s turned the Y into a paradox. By day, it's a hub for moral education, Bible study, job training, English classes for immigrants. By night, its swimming halls and dormitories hum with a different energy. Laughter, confessions, companionship that doesn't quite fit the words printed on the membership forms. The Y doesn't create desire, it just gives it a schedule. You catch snippets of gossip from the staff, a rumor about a member who transferred from another branch for personal reasons. Another story about a janitor quietly reassigning roommates after someone complained about too much closeness. Still, nobody says the word. The Y's silence is both shield and signal. What can't be discussed can't be condemned. There's one figure who stands out in this world. Wilmer Phelps, a YMCA physical director from Chicago. His reports are full of enthusiasm for fellowship through fitness, with lines like, "The pool is the cleanest symbol of the soul, pure, transparent, and revealing." He probably didn't mean that last part literally, but history has a sense of humor. By the late 1930s, American YMCAs have thousands of swimming pools. They're considered moral training grounds for young men. Yet they also become gathering spots for those quietly seeking community. In some cities, membership applications spike mysteriously after hours are extended. Local newspapers call the Y a home away from home. Some sociologists might call it something else. But there's no scandal, just silence. The Y continues its mission with perfect politeness. Posters hang in the hallway: keep fit, stay pure, help others. Meanwhile, downstairs, the locker room hums with a warmth the pamphlets never mention. You sit in the corner near the pool one evening, watching the reflections ripple across the ceiling. The lights shimmer like stained glass underwater. A group of men joke about who can hold their breath longest, and you can't help thinking this is what repression sounds like when it finds rhythm. Laughter, chlorine, the slap of water, the echo of freedom in disguise. Outside, the world is changing fast. Radio jazz, motion pictures, skyscrapers. But inside these tiled walls, the Y remains its own country. Here, men can be vulnerable without explanation. They can look, listen, and learn without naming the feeling. When the lights flicker off for the night, the pool goes still. The air cools. You hear footsteps, a towel dropped a quiet goodnight. The intimacy dissolves back into routine like a secret kept between breaths. Walking out, you pass a sign by the door. Mind and body trained for service. It's meant to sound wholesome. But to you, it feels like an accidental truth. The Y trained more than bodies. It trained generations of men to live double lives gracefully. The street outside glows with lamplight. You step into the night air carrying that humid scent of chlorine and quiet rebellion with you. Somewhere behind you, the pool still ripples like memory refusing to stay still. You wake to the sound of marching boots and the whistle of trains. The world has gone to war again, and the YMCA is following it this time, not just with sermons and sports, but with canteens, coffee, and comfort. The posters call it, "The Y serves the soldiers." The soldiers themselves just call it home, away from home. It's the 1910s and 1940s. In the same breath, the two world wars blurring like twin storms. The YMCA sets up wooden huts beside trenches, barracks, and bases from France to the Pacific. Inside, they hand out chocolate cigarettes, postcards, and paper for letters to sweethearts or to a friend back home. You step inside one of these huts, and it's nothing glamorous. Bare walls, folding tables, a pot of stale coffee on the stove. Yet the men flock to it, drawn less by the caffeine and more by the rare feeling of safety. Here, for the first time in months, they can exhale, talk, laugh, be human again. At one corner, a young private writes by candlelight. The letter begins, "Dearest," then hesitates, then starts over. You can tell he's trying to find the right word. The YMCA encourages correspondence, but not necessarily honesty. Still, the hut becomes what few places in war can be: a sanctuary where men can be gentle without being judged. You pour yourself some coffee and sit by the fire. Across from you, a chaplain is chatting with a group of soldiers about scripture. But as they talk, you see small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a glance that lingers, a laugh that stays a second too long. It's subtle but unmistakable. For all its moral intentions, the Y has once again built a place where affection hides in plain sight. The organization's reputation soars. Newspapers praise its wholesome influence on fighting men. Governments fund its work. But in private diaries, letters and rumors passed along camp bunks, another story forms the one the official reports never print. A corporal named James Hinton, writes home from France in 1918. The Y hut is a good place to be. The men are kind, and sometimes we stay long after the lights go out, just talking. You can forget the noise outside. You can be yourself here. His words are careful coded, but clear enough. You hear others like him, British, French, American, all describing the same thing. A strange, soft kind of brotherhood that war makes possible, but peace can't quite explain. The YMCA unintentionally becomes the bridge between the battlefield and something like love. During World War II, it happens again. The Y sends workers, both men and women, into military camps and hospitals. They organize dances, distribute supplies, and run correspondence clubs. They call it morale work. But under the surface, it's something deeper. The Y becomes a language of connection. In Italy, a sergeant helps repair a radio with a Y volunteer and writes later, "He made me forget the war for an hour." You picture those moments, the sound of boots on wooden floors, the smell of wet wool and coffee, the laughter echoing through the huts. For men who lived surrounded by destruction, that kind of gentleness could feel like rebellion. And yet, it's still dangerous. Homosexuality in the military is forbidden, punishable, unspoken. The Y's moral framework provides cover but not protection. You can pray together, write together, sleep under the same roof, but you can't name what you feel. So they invent codes. A shared cigarette means companionship. A borrowed handkerchief means trust. A letter signed, "Yours always," means everything. After the war, many veterans return home changed. They go back to their wives, their jobs, their quiet lives. But they remember the huts, the laughter, the letters, the small spaces where they were seen without explanation. And for some, that memory brings them right back to the YMCA. You visit one such Y in 1946. The veterans gather in the lounge, telling war stories that leave more unsaid than told. They talk about the old days, but you can see it in their eyes. Those weren't just stories of courage, they were stories of connection. The world thinks they came home to forget. Really, they came home to remember. There's a kind of poetry in that. An institution built to promote purity ends up nurturing something purer than its founders imagined. Care without pretense, affection without labels. You walk out of the Y's post-war hall into the evening air. The city is glowing again, neon electric, alive. Somewhere inside, a veteran plays piano softly, the notes drifting through the windows. The melody is old, maybe from the front lines, maybe from a campfire. You can't tell. It sounds like nostalgia with a heartbeat. The war is over, but the need it revealed, the need for touch, for company, for being seen, never left. And whether anyone will admit it or not, the YMCA will carry that legacy forward quietly in its walls, its pools, and its bunk rooms. For now, the lights go out one by one. You stand there, coffee in hand, watching the glow fade from the windows. Another day of ordered devotion and quiet contradiction tucked neatly into history's pocket. The 1950s tried to clean the YMCA's image, but you can't scrub away something that was never really dirty, just misunderstood. The war is over. The suburbs are spreading, and America has discovered its favorite new word, normal. Everything is supposed to look clean, patriotic, and heterosexual. Enough to make a magazine cover blush. The YMCA, once praised for its moral influence, suddenly feels like it needs a fresh coat of respectability. You walk into a post-war YMCA lobby, gleaming linoleum floors, a flag in every corner, and a portrait of George Washington staring down from the wall like he's checking attendance. There's a new slogan too, character through community. The idea is still the same: young men, good values, strong bodies. But the subtext has changed. Everyone's watching everyone. Behind the front desk, a manager flips through new regulations. No overnight guests. No shared beds. No unusual conduct. It's all coded language, of course. The wise administrators know about the quiet reputation that's followed their dorms and locker rooms for decades. Now, in the age of Cold War paranoia and police raids being too friendly isn't just gossip. It's a liability. You can almost feel the tension in the air. The same dormitories that once pulsed with warmth now hum with restraint. Curtains go up where there used to be open bunks. Showers get dividers. A new moral vigilance replaces the old moral preaching. Still, the Y can't erase what it's built. A young man named Raymond, recently discharged from the Navy, checks into the downtown branch in St. Louis. He's quiet, polite, grateful for a clean bed. The clerk smiles, tells him breakfast is served at 7. Prayer meeting at 9, lights out at 10. Simple rules for simple men, or so it seems. But Raymond notices what everyone notices. Eventually, the glances exchanged at the gym, the way some men linger by the pool after closing, the familiar rhythm of coded community. He doesn't name it, but he feels it a pulse under the surface, steady as ever. In the 1950s, police departments across American cities start targeting undesirable gatherings. YMCA facilities with their all-male membership and communal spaces occasionally appear in reports not as dens of sin, but as areas of potential moral weakness. The irony is so thick you could bench press it. The Y's founders had built an institution to keep men virtuous. Now it's accused of making them too close. Still inside the walls, life goes on. The residents read Life magazine in the lounge, watch black and white television, and play cards until curfew. On weekends, they go bowling or attend dances with the nearby YWCA, supervised, of course, with hymn music faintly playing in the background. It's the American dream in soft focus. But then there's the other Y, the one that exists after midnight, when the fluorescent lights hum and the city's noise dies down. The quiet talk in shared rooms, the soft laughter echoing down hallways, the private understanding that connection doesn't always look the way the pamphlets describe it. The same walls that once witnessed prayers now absorb whispers, coded phrases, and quiet comfort. There's a story from the Chicago YMCA in 1956. A janitor finds 2 men sitting shoulder to shoulder in the empty reading room long after curfew. They aren't doing anything wrong, just talking in low voices. The report gets filed, the men are asked to leave, and that's the end of it, at least on paper. But decades later, when someone retells the story, it sounds less like scandal and more like survival. 2 men found a moment of humanity in a decade allergic to honesty. You walk down one of those corridors yourself. The air smells faintly of disinfectant and aftershave. A Bible sits open on a table, pages curling with age. You wonder how many stories like that unfolded right here. Tiny rebellions wrapped in politeness, affection, disguised as fellowship. Meanwhile, the Y's public image grows shinier than ever. It runs summer camps, family programs, and youth leagues. Newspapers print photos of smiling lifeguards and clean-cut coaches. It's the very picture of moral American manhood, at least the version history wanted to sell. But the truth lingers quiet and alive. In cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, YMCAs become unspoken crossroads. Soldiers returning from Korea, artists looking for cheap rooms, men between lives. Some stay for weeks, others for years. They find each other not through announcements or clubs, but through eye contact, a glance in a mirror, a hand brushed against another in passing. It's not romantic in the cinematic sense. It's raw, tender, a kind of coded kindness. You might call it the invisible congregation, the one no preacher ever mentioned, but everyone somehow knew was there. You step outside one evening, just as the neon YMCA sign flickers to life. The city is glowing restless, pretending to be decent. You watch a young man in a fedora light a cigarette under the sign, wait a moment, then head inside. You don't know his name and you don't need to. The Y will remember him the way it remembers everyone quietly, without judgment, through the hum of pipes and the rhythm of footsteps in the hall. It's the late 1970s now, and the world feels like it's finally exhaling. The music's louder, the hair's longer, and the YMCA, after more than a century of earnest morality, suddenly finds itself with a disco beat. You walk down 8th Avenue in New York City, where the sidewalks are slick with nightlife and neon. A nightclub marquee glows with a name you already know: Village People. Inside, the crowd is dancing, sweating, shouting the letters of an organization that once held prayer meetings. YMCA. Each letter lands like a drum beat, and you can almost hear George Williams rolling in his Victorian grave. If that is, he could stop laughing long enough. Because somehow, in the most delightfully absurd twist of cultural history, the YMCA, founded to save young men from temptation, has become an anthem of it. You step into the dance floor, and it's glorious chaos: cowboys, bikers, construction workers, sailors, all exaggerated, all joyous. The crowd moves as one, arms forming letters in the air, sweat and glitter catching the strobe light. To most people, it's just fun, camp, harmless parody. But to those who know, it's also an inside joke. The song may have been written as a playful wink, but the subtext isn't subtle. The YMCA has been a haven for lonely young men for over a century. The Village People just said the quiet part out loud and added choreography. When the song drops its famous line, "You can get yourself clean. You can have a good meal. You can do whatever you feel," you realize how perfectly it captures the Y's contradictions. It's not mockery. It's a love letter to freedom, a reclaiming of something that was always there, humming under the hymns. After the disco wave hits, the YMCA's image changes overnight. For the first time, the letters stop being just an acronym and start being a symbol. Reporters ask the organization if they're offended. A few nervous executives release polite statements, reminding the public that the YMCA is a family institution. But the world is already laughing and dancing, and it's too late to take the groove back. Meanwhile, the real Ys across the country are still full of men working out swimming laps, reading newspapers in lobbies with bad coffee. In some branches, the staff joke about the song. In others, they try to ignore it. But no one can deny what's happened. The YMCA has become part of queer pop culture, an accidental emblem of everything it once tried to regulate. In Los Angeles, a Y lifeguard named Mark Alvarez tells a reporter, "We don't mind the song. It's good publicity. Though now we get people asking if it's really like that inside." He laughs, then adds, "Depends which branch you visit." You stop by a real YMCA gym one evening. The music isn't disco. It's the hum of treadmills, the splash of the pool, the clink of weights. But even here, the Village People's echo lingers. Someone hums the chorus while drying off. Someone else jokes about joining for research. The irony is that for many gay men in the 1970s, the Y really was one of the few public spaces where they could meet safely, discreetly, and with some sense of belonging. And not just in New York. In Chicago, in San Francisco, in London, the Y's dormitories and gyms became quiet crossroads for men navigating lives between conformity and courage. For some, it was the first place they ever felt the comfort of being near someone who understood. For others, it was simply the safest place in the city to breathe. You walk through one of those dormitory halls again, this time in the 1970s. Glow of fluorescent lights and beige carpet. The rules are still there. No visitors, no noise after 10. But they feel hollow now, relics of an older fear. The men who stay here aren't pretending to be saints anymore. They're just surviving, maybe even living. Outside, the city is changing fast. Stonewall liberation marches, protest signs in one hand and disco balls in the other. The YMCA doesn't endorse any of it publicly, but it doesn't stop it either. Like always, it becomes what people need it to be: a gym, a refuge, a punchline, a memory. You pause for a moment, watching a group of young men leave the building together, laughing still damp from the pool. The neon sign above them buzzes faintly, half the letters flickering out. YMCA, but the last day is dark. Somehow that feels perfect. The story isn't finished. Later that night, you hear the village people's song again echoing from a passing car. The driver leans out, singing along, carefree, proud. It's funny how history works, how an institution born to suppress desire ends up immortalized by it. You grin thinking about George Williams again, the lonely draper who built a moral sanctuary. He wanted to save souls. He did. Just not the way he thought. The music fades, the disco lights go out, and by the 1980s, the YMCA has to face a new kind of storm, one far quieter, far crueler, and impossible to dance away from. The word AIDS enters headlines, whispered at first, then screamed across front pages. Fear takes over where rhythm once was. You stand outside a downtown YMCA, same building, new decade. The sign is freshly painted, but the mood inside has changed. The laughter of the 1970s has been replaced by caution, by grief. For years, the Y had been a discreet meeting ground, a refuge of shared solitude. Now it becomes something else entirely, a crossroads between stigma and sanctuary. In New York, in San Francisco, in Chicago, men who used to joke in locker rooms begin vanishing quietly. No one says why. Obituaries grow longer. The Y's staff put up posters about healthy living using coded language no one misunderstands. Safe behavior. Balanced lifestyles. The organization, caught between its Christian roots and its human conscience, doesn't know how to respond. But some branches choose compassion over silence. At the San Francisco Y, volunteers organize wellness classes and counseling groups, carefully worded, quietly radical. One supervisor, Michael Young, writes in a report, "Our duty is to health, not judgment." That's the Y's paradox, in one sentence born from religion, but evolving toward empathy. In the lobby, you see two men sitting together, one with a gym bag, the other pale and thin, wearing a hospital bracelet. They don't speak much. They don't need to. The front desk worker glances over but says nothing. The Y has always had its unspoken codes. This one just feels heavier. The world outside is in moral panic mode, again the same fear dressed in modern clothes. Newspapers run headlines about moral decay. TV preachers blame sin, and politicians invoke family values as a shield for cruelty. Inside the YMCA, the echo of George Williams's old dream, the one about salvation through brotherhood, feels almost prophetic. The Y doesn't officially march or protest, but it quietly becomes one of the few places where men can still come exercise, talk, and remember they're not alone. The 1980s and 90s bring another challenge: reinvention. The YMCA rebrands itself. It becomes the Y. Out go the Bible classes, income youth programs, daycare centers, community outreach. The buildings start to change too. More windows, fewer dorms, more treadmills. The once secretive world of shared bunks gives way to open lobbies and family memberships. The same walls that once hid longing now echo with children's laughter and the squeak of basketball shoes. You walk through one of these new Ys somewhere in Los Angeles. The walls are bright, the staff wear polo shirts with smiling sun logos, and the air smells like pool chlorine and optimism. But in the corners, the ghosts remain. The locker rooms still have that hum of private memory. The showers still whisper faintly with history. A middle-aged man on the treadmill next to you, sweat-soaked and serious, tells you he's been coming here since 1978. Back then, he says, we didn't talk about who we were. We just knew. He laughs softly. Now they hang rainbow flags every June. Funny world, huh? You ask him if it feels different now. He thinks for a moment, then says, not really. Just safer to smile. The Y's national office finally begins using inclusive language, quietly at first, then proudly. By the mid-1990s, it launches programs for LGBTQ youth support groups and health awareness campaigns. The organization that once tried to define purity now helps define acceptance. Not because it abandoned its mission, but because it rediscovered what it actually meant: community. And yet the Y's dual identity never quite disappears. In some towns, it's still a church-adjacent fitness center with strict dress codes. In others, it's a progressive hub for inclusivity and public health. The logo changes. The rhetoric changes. The rhythm of humanity stays the same. You stop in front of a corkboard near the exit. Photos line it: swimmers, volunteers, smiling children. At the bottom corner, a small faded picture catches your eye. 3 men in the 1940s, grinning beside a pool, arms around each other. No caption, no context, just sunlight and friendship. You imagine someone decades from now finding that photo, trying to decode it. Was it innocence, brotherhood, something else? Maybe all three. That's the thing about the YMCA's history. It doesn't fit neatly into categories of sin or salvation. It's just people trying to belong, decade after decade. The 1990s end with the Y more alive than ever. Bigger, broader, cleaner. But its walls still hum with stories. The same energy that once whispered through hymns and locker rooms now flows through classrooms and community pools. The difference is that now, finally, no one has to pretend. You step outside into the night. A summer breeze cuts through the city, carrying faint music from a nearby block party. Yes, that song again, still echoing after all these years. Someone laughs, shouts the letters YMCA, and you can't help but grin. Maybe that's what survival sounds like: joy outlasting shame. If walls could talk, the YMCA's would hum. Not with scandal, but with centuries of heartbeat. You're standing in a modern Y, now somewhere in 2025. The air smells faintly of disinfectant and coconut sunscreen. The treadmills hum like distant trains. Parents are signing up their kids for swimming lessons. A group of retirees stretch in a yoga class called Silver Strength. Nobody's thinking about George Williams, or soldiers in huts, or dormitories lit by gaslight. But somehow, all of that is still here. The letters have changed meaning again. The C no longer demands Christianity. It whispers community. The M is less about men, more about membership. The A still association, but now anyone can join. You glance at a rainbow sticker on the front desk that reads, "All are welcome." It's simple, unpretentious, and a century late, but it's here. You walk through the building slowly. The pool water glows turquoise under LED lights. The weight room clangs with effort and rhythm. Upstairs, a teen volunteers to teach English to refugees. Downstairs, two men in their 60s sit at a cafe table, laughing, their knees almost touching. No one looks twice. The quiet miracle isn't that it's happening. It's that it doesn't have to hide anymore. It's funny, really. For generations, the YMCA tried to polish its image to be cleaner, purer, straighter, until the world caught up and realized that what it had all along wasn't impurity, but humanity. Brotherhood. Connection. The Y didn't corrupt virtue, it revealed it. It gave loneliness a gym membership. You wander into a hallway lined with historical photos. There's George Williams again, stern and hopeful. Beside him, 19th century Londoners in waistcoats. Then soldiers writing letters in World War I huts. Swimmers from the 1930s. A YMCA sign half lit in 1978, the disco decade frozen mid-beat. The captions tell the official story, Faith Fitness Service. But you know there's a quieter story between the lines. The story of men who found pieces of themselves here when the rest of the world said they weren't allowed to. You pause by one last photo, a sepia snapshot of a group of men posing on a basketball court. Their smiles are wide, natural, unguarded. You look closer and realize one of them is resting his hand on another's shoulder, casually, confidently. No one in the frame seems to mind. Maybe they never did. Outside, the sun is setting through the glass doors, and for a moment the reflection of the letters glows on the floor YMCA. They used to mean rules. Now they mean stories. You sit on a bench near the exit, listening to the distant sound of splashing from the pool. You imagine all the echoes layered beneath that water. The laughter of clerks in 1850s London, the chants of soldiers riding home, the quiet voices in mid-century dorms, the roar of disco crowds dancing without shame. Every decade left its sound, and somehow they all blend into one low, beautiful hum. And that hum, more than anything, is the truth about the YMCA. It's not one story, it's thousands of them overlapping, contradicting, forgiving each other. It's the story of a place that began with a mission to save men's souls and ended up saving their sanity. You lean back, eyes half closed, feeling that soft fatigue that comes when the past finally feels at peace. If George Williams were here, maybe he'd be confused by how it all turned out. Or maybe deep down, he'd smile. After all, his dream was simple: give people a place to belong. He just didn't know how many kinds of belonging the world would one day need. The lights dim, the hum fades, and the night outside folds over the city. Somewhere a car drives by, stereo blaring, and you catch a familiar tune floating through the open doors. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. You smile, and this time it doesn't sound ironic. It sounds like history singing itself to sleep. The story doesn't end at the city pool or the disco floor. Beyond the walls of every YMCA waits another world: open skies, pine trees, campfires crackling under the stars. Out there, generations learn teamwork, faith, and freedom in ways classrooms never could. Next, you'll head into the woods to explore how YMCA camps shape generations. It all started with one summer, one lake, and one city kid who'd never seen a tree taller than a lamppost. You're standing in the year 1885, somewhere in upstate New York, where the air smells like pine needles, and the word vacation still sounds suspiciously fancy. In front of you stretches a small clearing beside a lake, and scattered across it are a few tents, a few dozen boys, and one big idea that's about to rewrite childhood. The YMCA, ever the moral inventor, had decided that city boys were too soft. Too pale from factory smoke, too fragile from indoor lives, too tempted by the evils of billiard halls and nickel theaters. Their solution: ship them out into the wilderness to build character through hard work, prayer, and possibly a few mosquito bites the size of nickels. The first official YMCA camp sprouted here, Camp Dudley, founded by a man named Sumner F. Dudley, who was less of a drill sergeant and more of a benevolent uncle with a clipboard. His theory was simple: if you give a kid a canoe and a compass, maybe he'll find both nature and God before getting lost in either. So here you are watching those early campers stumble off the train shoes, too clean faces, too curious. They lug their trunks down dirt paths, blinking at the sunlight. There's no Wi-Fi, of course, not even electricity. Just a mess tent, a wooden dock, and the kind of silence you can only get from 200 miles of forest. The boys gather around as Dudley gives his welcome speech. Here we'll learn to live as men, he says. You can practically hear the capital letters in his voice. We'll rise early, swim, pray, and play. We'll build strong bodies and stronger spirits. Half the boys nod solemnly. The other half are already eyeing the lake, wondering how cold it is. The first days are a blur of awkward enthusiasm. Morning calisthenics oatmeal that tastes faintly of smoke and hymns sung off-key around a campfire that refuses to light. There's no manual for this kind of thing. They're inventing camp life as they go. A counselor suggests adding tug-of-war to build teamwork. Another proposes silent reflection by the water to build virtue. A third just wants to figure out how to cook beans without starting another forest fire. But slowly, something works. The boys stop standing like clerks and start moving like explorers. They swim across the lake, learn how to tie knots, rowboats, and tell stories under stars they've never seen before. It's not just recreation, it's revelation. For the first time, these sons of clerks and shopkeepers can sweat without shame. By evening, the camp settles into rhythm. The crickets start their song, someone strums a banjo badly, and a counselor leads the group in prayer. The words float over the lake, half sacred, half sleepy. You can feel the mix of religion and rebellion taking shape. The wise, strange gift for turning moral duty into something that actually feels fun. If you listen closely, you can hear the blueprint forming. Every future summer camp, from scout lodges to corporate retreats, will borrow this formula: faith, fitness, and fresh air. Even the phrase, character building, that parents still love to use, began right here among boys, trying to find their socks after a morning dip. It's hard not to laugh at some of the rituals. They try to march in straight lines like soldiers, but trip over roots. They give speeches about purity while sneaking extra biscuits at dinner. But somehow, all of it adds up to something honest. The wilderness makes them human again. As the sun sets, Dudley stands by the firearms, folded, smiling quietly. He probably doesn't realize he's launched an empire of tents and bug spray that will outlive him by centuries. All he knows is that for once, the boys aren't homesick, they're alive. That night you lie in your own tent listening to the lake breathe. Somewhere nearby, a boy snores loud enough to scare off raccoons. Another whispers a prayer. You think about how strange it is that this simple experiment, city kids meeting trees, will ripple across generations. You can almost see it now. The evolution from hymns to hiking, from scripture to s'mores. The modern world will forget the sermons, but remember the sunrise, the smell of wet pine, the friendships born over cold oatmeal. That's how traditions survive quietly, accidentally, beautifully. The fire dies down, the crickets keep time, and the wilderness begins to hum with history. Morning comes too early, as it always does in the woods. The air is so crisp, it could slice your lungs in half, and the fog rolls across the lake like spilled milk. A whistle blows somewhere near the camp's edge, sharp enough to wake the trees. Welcome to your first full day at a YMCA camp, the world's most righteous experiment in organized discomfort. You roll out of your canvas cot already tangled in the blanket you swore was folded neatly last night. The ground underneath you feels alive, damp pine needles. Tiny pebbles may be a beetle that's already plotting revenge. Around you, the other boys groan their way into the morning, rubbing their eyes and pretending they're not cold. At 6:00 a.m., sharp, a counselor named Mr. Harlan, the kind of man who looks like he eats oatmeal for sport, marches through the tents shouting, "Rise and shine." The Lord loves an early riser. You can't help wondering if the Lord might also love just one more hour of sleep, but nobody dares ask. The camp's first tradition of the day, a refreshing dip in the lake. You line up with the others, feet crunching through frost-tipped grass as mist curls off the water like a ghost. When you dive in the cold, hit so hard it feels biblical, the kind of cold that makes you instantly reconsider every life choice leading up to this moment. Somewhere in the distance, a loon cries, probably laughing. Afterward, breakfast oatmeal again, coffee for counselors, and stale bread disguised as toast. But it doesn't matter. Hunger makes everything taste heroic. You sit on a log bench beside kids from New York, Philadelphia, Boston City boys who've traded smoke and cobblestones for pine sap and mosquito bites. You talk about who swam farthest, who screamed the loudest, who'll actually survive the week. It's noisy, chaotic, alive. The YMCA believes deeply in routine structure builds. Discipline builds virtue, virtue builds character, and character, apparently, is the goal of every mosquito's life. After breakfast comes quiet reflection. Then Bible reading. Then physical drills. Campers march in circles while counselors quote Corinthians. The idea is noble to make boys strong in body and spirit. The execution sometimes just looks like confused cardio. You glance over at a friend, a skinny kid named Arthur, who joined because his parents thought country air would build courage. Right now, Arthur's courage is mainly focused on surviving push-ups in wet grass. You catch his eye and grin. He grins back. That's how bonds form. Here's shared misery and damp socks. The rest of the day is a blend of chaos and charm. Canoe lessons that end with half the group in the water, knot tying exercises that turn into rope tangles resembling modern art. And always the hymns. So many hymns. Morning hymns, mealtime hymns, campfire hymns, half off key, all sincere. The woods echo with young voices singing about faith, courage, and love, while mosquitoes conduct from above. But beneath the moral sermons and bug bites, something real is happening. These boys' clerks' sons, factory workers' sons, children who've never seen more than a postage stamp yard are learning to breathe in open air. They're learning that dirt washes off that laughter carries, and that teamwork isn't just a word printed on a pamphlet. At midday, Mr. Harlan gathers everyone under a rough-hewn shelter for a talk about manhood. He paces like a preacher and tells stories of explorers, missionaries, and heroes of empire. To be strong, he says, is to serve others. Some of the boys nod, but most are staring at the sandwich in their hand, calculating whether service includes sharing lunch. Still, the seed is planted. Years later, some of them will remember this exact moment, not the words, but the warmth of belonging to something bigger than themselves. By late afternoon, the camp hums with small victories. Someone catches a fish. Someone else learns to build a fire without burning the forest down. Even Arthur manages to paddle straight for 5 whole minutes. Every triumph, no matter how tiny, earns applause. It's not competition here, it's community. Dinner smells like heaven, disguised as stew. Afterward, you gather at the campfire. The smoke curls upward, thick and blue, while the counselors strum guitars and lead songs about courage, faith, and friendship. The stars appear one by one, sharp enough to cut the sky open. For boys who've only ever known lamplight, this is sorcery. You lean back, belly full skin, still tingling from cold water and sunburn, and realize something strange. You feel proud. Not of the prayers or the swimming distance, but of the simple fact that you've survived the day. You glance around the circle of faces glowing orange in the firelight and think maybe this is what growing up feels like, wet, sore, and unexpectedly wonderful. A counselor says goodnight, the fire pops, and the forest exhales. In your tent, the crickets sing their own hymn. You close your eyes, half smiling, half dreaming, knowing that tomorrow will bring more blisters, more laughter, and more of that unexplainable magic that turns strangers into brothers. The first dawn at camp doesn't so much arrive as it ambushes you. The lake is still half asleep, steam curling off the surface like it's sighing at the thought of another day. A bell clangs somewhere near the mess tent, sharp, metallic, unreasonably cheerful. "Rise and shine," a counselor yells. It's not even 5:30. You crawl out of your tent barefoot in the dew and instantly question every decision that led to this point. The ground is cold, your blanket smells like damp canvas, and someone's already singing a hymn far too loudly for this hour. Welcome to YMCA camp life circa 1890, equal parts moral discipline and damp socks. Breakfast is oatmeal again, of course, and this time the smoke flavor is intentional. The camp's kitchen is little more than a lean-to, with a fire pit, a blackened pot, and a teenager who insists he knows how to cook because his mother once let him stir gravy. You eat fast anyway because the real test comes after the morning dip. Every camper by tradition must run screaming into the freezing lake before prayers. They call it invigorating. You call it voluntary hypothermia. But as the water hits your chest, you can't help laughing, part shock, part surrender. Around you, boys splash, shout, and howl like a choir of wild geese. It's miserable, glorious, and somehow exactly what you needed. Once everyone's sufficiently blue, the counselors herd the group into a semicircle for morning devotion. Hymns echo across the lake, "Nearer, my God, to thee." If the harmonies hold, and a short reading about courage or kindness follows. The idea is that faith comes easiest when your body's shivering too much to argue. After breakfast, clean up, a democratic system of shared chores, which somehow always ends with the youngest boy hauling water. The day opens up into what the Y calls structured freedom. You can chop wood, row hike, or help build the new chapel platform. No one calls it exercise, but that's what it is. Muscles learned through repetition, not vanity. By mid-morning, the sun has burned away the mist, and the whole camp smells of pine resin, wet rope, and soap. Boys run barefoot through the grass, their earlier politeness giving way to something more primitive, shouting, laughing, inventing games with sticks and imagination. For the first time, the Y discovers the secret to moral education. Make it fun enough that no one notices. It's moral. There's a rhythm to it all. Bell for meals, whistle for swim time, prayer, before lights out. Evenings are the best campfire stories, sing-alongs, and something called testimony, where boys talk about what they've learned. Some confess they've never seen stars before. Others talk about courage or homesickness or how they'll miss the quiet when they return to the city. You wonder if they realize how rare this kind of peace is, even then. Of course, there are disasters. One boy accidentally tips a canoe and spends an hour trying to rescue his shoe. Another, assigned to latrine duty, writes a letter home begging to be transferred to another camp that values dignity. The counselors, most of them, barely older than the campers, improvise solutions, half practical, half philosophical. Every mistake becomes a metaphor. Every scraped knee a lesson in perseverance. In truth, these early YMCA camps are a strange fusion of military training, Sunday school, and outdoor theater. They're serious about moral growth, but they can't resist the comedy of it all. By afternoon, you'll see a boy solemnly delivering a sermon on self-control, while wearing a garland of pine needles like a crown. The line between discipline and delight blurs beautifully. And when night falls, the lake mirrors the firelight like molten glass. You sit with the others, legs crossed, the air full of wood smoke and sleepy chatter. A counselor reads a letter from Mr. Dudley himself, something about raising a generation of noble spirits. The boys listen, half interested, half drowsy, but you can feel it sinking in. The wilderness is teaching them patience, humility, and something quieter. How to be small in a big world and still belong. As the last hymn fades, you stretch out on the ground, the scent of grass filling your lungs. The stars are absurdly bright. Someone beside you whispers, "It feels like heaven's closer here." You don't argue. For a movement born from moral reform, the YMCA has accidentally stumbled on a far greater truth. People don't become better by being preached at. They change by doing, by laughing, by freezing together in a lake at dawn. That right there might be the most revolutionary sermon ever shouted through chattering teeth. By the time the century turns, the YMCA has become a factory of virtue with a summer twist. What started as a few tents by a lake has multiplied into a national web of camps stretching from Maine to California. And their mission, to turn soft city boys into upright men of character, the kind who can quote scripture while chopping wood in perfect rhythm. You wake up to bugles, now not bells. The camps have become organized, almost militarized. There's a schedule for everything: swimming drills, prayer meals, rest periods. Even spontaneous fun has its assigned time slot. The camp directors believe structure builds discipline, and discipline builds manhood. It's America's new religion. Call it muscular Christianity. You can see it in everything: the posture of the boys, the way they march to breakfast, even the slogans painted on cabin walls: clean living, high thinking. It's not just about faith anymore. It's about forging citizens. The YMCA sees itself as the workshop of the nation, shaping the next generation of fathers, workers, and leaders. If this sounds a little intense for a summer getaway, you're not wrong. The early 1900s were obsessed with masculinity. Industrialization was making men feel soft machines, did the heavy lifting now, not muscles. So the YMCA offered to cure the wilderness as moral gymnasium. Each camp became a small republic of sweat, self-control, and synchronized calisthenics. Mornings start with setting up exercises, lines of boys swinging their arms, counting in unison, their voices echoing across the lake like some hymn to coordination. The counselors pace like generals with clipboards. Stand tall, shoulders back. Breathe like a man. It's ridiculous and inspiring at once, a kind of national theater of self-improvement. But even in this regimented world, the Y can't quite hide its tenderness. Between drills, the boys sprawl in the grass, arguing about who can skip stones farther. They learn how to build fires, fix blisters, and talk about fear without flinching. The counselors, despite their stern tone, become mentors, stand-ins for fathers lost to work or war. And somewhere in that messy mix of sweat and sincerity, the boys discover something no textbook teaches: trust. A counselor named Ernest Thompson Seton visits one summer and takes notes. He's so inspired that he later helps found the Boy Scouts, borrowing nearly everything: the tents, the hymns, even the moral slogans from the Y. If the Scouts taught the world how to tie knots, the YMCA taught it why it mattered. At the same time, the Y's camps start attracting attention from educators and reformers. Psychologists call it character education. Politicians call it nation building. Parents just call it a safe way to tire them out. Whatever the reason, the movement grows. By 1910, thousands of children are being shipped out to camp every summer. You wander through one of these booming camps in 1912. The smell of bacon drifts from the mess hall, mingling with pine and wet earth. Boys scrub pots, haul logs, practice knots. One group rehearses a patriotic pageant called the Spirit of the Pioneer, complete with wooden muskets and paper beards. They're performing the national myth on a loop and loving every minute. During lunch, the camp director gives a talk about building backbone. He pounds the table for emphasis, the plates rattling. This is not a vacation, he declares. It is preparation for life. The boys nod solemnly, though one is secretly doodling a canoe on his napkin. Still, the Y's version of manhood is broader than the military's. It includes kindness, honesty, cooperation, virtues they believe are muscles too. Evening gatherings around the fire blend patriotism with poetry. They recite Emerson Whitman, sometimes even a touch of Shakespeare. One counselor says, "A gentleman is one who fights fairly and forgives freely." The boys listen sleepy-eyed, but moved. By the end of each season, they return home taller, tanner, maybe even humbler. Letters from parents gush about how their sons walk straighter and speak with new confidence. Newspapers print glowing stories of YMCA campers as the moral backbone of modern America. But there's another layer no one writes about. Beneath all the drills and discipline the boys have discovered, companionship, deep, wordless bonds formed under canvas roofs and starry skies. When they say goodbye, they promise to write to return next year to stay good. You can tell they mean it. As you sit by the lake one evening, listening to the bugle call echo across the water, it's easy to see what the YMCA has built. Not just stronger bodies, but something softer, a blueprint for belonging. And in an age obsessed with toughness, that might be its most radical act. The flag flutters against the sunset, the air cooling. Somewhere a counselor reads from Corinthians. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. You glance around at the boys, roasting marshmallows, faces glowing with firelight and freedom, and think maybe not all childish things are worth putting away. The moment girls arrived, the campfire stopped being a sermon and started being a song. It's the 1910s now, and the YMCA's empire of tents and hymns has become a national institution. Boys return home tanned and reformed, carrying stories of heroism, involving canoes, frogs, and moral awakening. The experiment is such a success that someone finally asks the obvious question, what about the girls? Across town, the YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association, is watching closely. Its founders believe girls deserve the same chance to grow to escape the sooty cities, to breathe air unfiltered by laundry steam and expectation. But the challenge is bigger than mosquitoes and muddy trails. Society, still corseted in Edwardian morality, isn't quite sure what to do with women who climb trees. You find yourself at one of the first YWCA summer camps around 1912 on the shores of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. The scene looks familiar. Tent stocks and a hand-painted sign that reads, "Camp for Christian Character." But the energy is different. Laughter replaces discipline. Curiosity replaces formality. Here girls are told they can be strong, capable, and unafraid of getting dirt under their nails. Revolutionary stuff, really. Morning begins, not with a bugle, but with singing voices rising over the waterlight and unself-conscious. They swim, row hike, and learn to start campfires. They practice first aid leadership and public speaking. No corsets allowed. The newspapers, of course, call it unladylike. The girls call it freedom. A camp leader named Miss Mary Rockwell Hook, an architect and YWCA visionary, designs cabins with open-air sleeping porches so girls can fall asleep under the stars. They must see the sky, she says, to believe they can reach it. You can't help but smile at that half poetry, half manifesto. Afternoons are filled with crafts, canoeing, and moral discussions which sound serious until you realize they're mostly about how to balance friendship, faith, and ambition. At night, they gather around the fire to tell ghost stories and sing folk songs borrowed from the boys' camps, only slower, softer, and with harmonies that make the pines tremble. One counselor jokes that the only thing missing is the smell of bacon grease and testosterone. Another adds, "Let's keep it that way." The truth is, these women are quietly rewriting the meaning of virtue. Strength is no longer about how many push-ups you can do before breakfast. It's about courage, independence, and kindness. You overhear one girl say, "I never knew girls could paddle so far." Another answers, "Maybe we've just never been allowed to try." That's the sound of history shifting one oar stroke at a time. By the 1920s, YMCA and YWCA camps start sharing ideas, co-hosting events, and even gasp experimenting with co-ed retreats. The parents are scandalized, the teenagers thrilled. The leaders insist it's about social education, which is technically true if you ignore the blushing. But even these supervised interactions help shape a new generation of equality-minded youth. The cultural change isn't small. These camps produce teachers, nurses, and reformers who carry their summer lessons into the real world. They've learned that leadership isn't inherited, it's practiced. They've learned that community isn't about gender, it's about effort. Even the daily rituals evolve. Instead of hymns, some camps begin mornings with group reflections, gratitude circles, stories about overcoming fear, plans for the day. The wise moral code doesn't vanish. It grows up. It shifts from preaching purity to teaching purpose. You walk by the lake at sunset, watching a group of girls haul in a canoe. Their hands are blistered, their clothes soak their faces radiant. The counselor, a woman in her 30s, with a whistle around her neck, laughs and shouts, "That's how you learn wet, tired, and proud." It's not something Victorian mothers would have approved of, but it's exactly what modern womanhood needs. Evening brings the campfire again. The girls sit shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in blankets, their voices rising into the dusk. They sing a new kind of hymn, not to God, not to nation, but to possibility. The lyrics talk about climbing mountains, about friendship, about courage that lives quietly in the heart. You watch their faces in the flickering light, and you realize this is how revolutions are born, not in parliaments, but in pine forests. When the embers crackle low, one counselor quotes a line that's been painted on the camp gate. "Here we learn to live greatly." You glance at the group, the smoke curling upward, the stars flickering awake overhead. They're not just learning to live greatly, they're learning to live freely. And whether they know it or not, they're changing everything. The year is 1933, and the world has gone gray. The stock market has crashed, factories have closed, and families are trading shoes for food. Yet here by the edge of a lake in upstate New York, the fire still crackles, the songs still rise, and the YMCA camp flag still flaps weakly against the dawn breeze. You arrive at breakfast just as the cook's volunteers from the city are ladling out oatmeal to a line of skinny kids in hand-me-down shirts. The bowls are chipped, the spoons mismatched, but no one complains. For many, this is the first real meal of the week. "Eat up, boys," says the counselor, smiling too brightly for someone who knows half the parents can't pay tuition. It's a good day to be outdoors. That's the magic of the Depression-era YMCA camp. It pretends the world hasn't fallen apart. Out here, far from breadlines and layoffs, children learn to be children again. The Y had always promised character, but now it's offering something far rarer: relief. Across the country, local YMCAs partner with churches, charities, and the newly formed New Deal agencies to make camp free for families. Counselors arrive by train with crates of donated supplies: blankets, fishing rods, flour. Some even bring old phonographs for music nights, spinning records until the batteries die. You walk through camp that afternoon and see kids playing baseball with a stick and a taped-up ball. Others wade into the lake, their laughter ringing through the trees like defiance. One boy, no more than 10, shows off his only possession, a harmonica given by the camp director. "Got this for singing the loudest." Last night, he says proudly, his ribs faintly visible beneath his shirt. The director, a burly man named Harold "Pop" Winters, keeps a ledger full of names, not debts. "We'll figure out the rest," he tells donors. These kids need air, not arithmetic. He believes the wilderness can feed what bread cannot hope. Under his care, the camp becomes a sanctuary for the working class. A small republic of equality where no one is poor because no one owns much of anything anyway. The activities are simple but sacred: fishing, hiking, storytelling, and nightly bonfires that burn like beacons against despair. In the city, these boys and girls would be queuing for soup. Here they're climbing trees and learning knots, imagining a world that might not crush them after all. One night, the camp gathers by the water for a council fire, a new ritual invented during the Depression to replace fancy pageants. Pop Winters stands by the flames, face-lined, voice deep and warm. "Remember," he tells the campers, "the fire we build here burns in hard times too. When you go home, keep it alive." The children don't understand fully, but they nod, wide-eyed, holding sticks like torches. Later in the cabins, they whisper stories about what they'll do when they grow up. Be teachers, builders, maybe even presidents. You realize that the YMCA has turned its moral experiment into something revolutionary. Resilience training for an entire generation. By the late 1930s, more than 100,000 kids a year attend Y camps. Many are sponsored by local businessmen or union funds. Some camps even introduce scholarships, an unheard-of concept in youth recreation. The Y's goal shifts from building Christian soldiers to raising good citizens. It's patriotism without the parade, faith without the sermon. And somehow it works. The campers return home with stories that spread faster than sermons. "We sang till the stars came out. We hiked to the ridge. We didn't feel poor there." For many families, that feeling of normalcy, of being part of something larger, becomes priceless. Even the newspapers notice. A 1937 article calls YMCA camps factories of spirit in an age of scarcity. It's true. There's no electricity, no fancy equipment, just the raw power of community. Out here, equality isn't an idea, it's the air itself. As you walk through the quiet camp one evening, you see the counselors cleaning dishes, the lanterns glowing, the shadows of children dancing by the fire. The economy might be broken, but the Y has found a loophole in despair friendship. The crickets start their nightly chorus, soft and stubborn. Somewhere a harmonica plays again, probably that same boy from earlier, his tune shaky but steady. You sit on a rock, listening, watching sparks drift into the night. The Great Depression has turned America inside out. But here, under the pines, you can still believe in tomorrow. By the 1940s, the same campers who once learned to tie knots and paddle canoes are now tying bandages and loading rifles. The world is at war again, and the YMCA's lakeside sanctuaries are suddenly feeding into something far bigger than summer tradition. The campfires still burn, but now they flicker in a shadow cast by global conflict. You're at a camp in the summer of 1942, deep in the Adirondacks. The air smells of pine and rationed coffee. The counselors, most of them barely out of high school, wear khaki shirts and broad smiles that hide the knowledge that they'll soon trade whistles for helmets. The war seeps into everything. Songs, letters, even the grace before meals. The morning bell rings, and a group of campers scrambles out of bunks, chattering about news they overheard on the radio. They say the Y's running canteens for soldiers in Europe, one boy says proudly. He's not wrong. YMCA staff are already overseas running huts for Allied troops, serving cocoa, writing letters, handing out books. At home, the camps become patriotic engines, teaching citizenship through service. The daily schedule is still campy swimming archery crafts, but everything now has a moral undercurrent: teamwork, discipline, endurance. Instead of sermons, counselors talk about doing your part. Instead of hymns, they sing folk songs about courage and home. Even the games change. Relay races become missions. Treasure hunts become rescue drills. You can't miss the symbolism. These kids are being raised to rebuild the world, one canoe at a time. At noon, they gather around the flagpole. The stars and stripes rises slowly, the morning sun catching its folds. Everyone salutes, then recites a new pledge added for wartime. We will serve God, our country, and each other. It's simple, stirring, and unmistakably serious. But beneath all this patriotism, there's still wonder. The camp lake glitters like silver. The woods hum with cicadas, and laughter rings out from the mess hall. The YMCA has mastered the art of holding two truths at once: discipline and delight, order and freedom. Some camps even transform into training grounds for Victory Corps. Teenagers learning first aid, outdoor survival, and Morse code. One counselor, Edwin Red Taylor, a former camper turned Army medic, returns home on leave to teach first aid. He tells the kids, "You'll never know how much a clear head can save a life." They listen, eyes wide, clutching bandages like medals. The war changes everything. But it also magnifies what the YMCA has always stood for: connection. Letters from the front prove it. Soldiers write home about missing the smell of campfires, the taste of tin cup cocoa, the calm of starlit lakes. For many, those summer nights by the water become a kind of emotional compass, a reminder of why they're fighting. By 1945, the war ends and the camps fill again, this time with a generation of children who've known nothing but ration books and air raid drills. The wise message shifts once more. Now it's about peace. War made men strong, says one brochure, but peace must make them good. In that spirit, the YMCA launches a new kind of Camp World friendship camps. Here, kids from different countries, sometimes even former enemies, share cabins, cook together, and swap stories about home. You find yourself at one such camp in 1948, watching a German boy and an American boy race canoes across the same lake where soldiers once trained. When they finish gasping and laughing, the counselor claps and says, "Now that's diplomacy." The scene feels almost surreal. Only a few years earlier, their fathers might have been shooting at each other. Now they're roasting marshmallows. That's the quiet genius of the YMCA. It does peace the way it once did virtue, through fun. By the 1950s, camps across the U.S. and abroad adopt the phrase, "peace through understanding." Kids exchange pen pal letters, paint murals about global unity, and learn songs in multiple languages. The old slogans of Christian manliness have softened into something broader: faith in humanity itself. One night during a campfire at one of these international camps, A counselor reads from a letter written by a Japanese student. "We built a bridge here, not from wood, but from laughter." The group goes quiet. You can almost feel the world exhaling after years of holding its breath. And still the rituals remain the same. The stars above the hiss of pine in the wind, the scent of smoke curling into the dark, those are constants connecting one generation of campers to the next. The war didn't end that. It only deepened the meaning. You sit by the dying fire, watching the sparks drift upward, wondering how many lives were saved in spirit, if not in body, by the lessons learned here: teamwork, empathy, courage, in the face of fear. The lake is still the night wide. Somewhere across the world, another campfire burns. Another group of children sings about peace and history, once again quietly heals itself through play. The 1960s set the campfire ablaze, not with kindling, but with change. The world has shifted again. Civil rights marches thunder through southern streets, anti-war protests fill college quads, and young Americans are questioning every institution they inherited, including the YMCA. Out in the woods, however, the Y's camp still wake to the same sounds: wind in the trees, loons calling across the lake, counselors shouting, "Rise and shine." But beneath that timeless calm, something revolutionary is stirring. You're at a camp in North Carolina in the summer of 1964. The morning mist clings to the water, but tension hangs heavier than humidity. For the first time, the camp has invited black and white children to share cabins, a small miracle, in a region still wrestling with segregation. The director, Mr. Schreitzer, Franklin Rhodes, insists. If we can get them to share a canoe, the world can learn from it. Some parents withdraw their children. Others send them anyway, hoping for proof that the world can be better than it looks on TV. Breakfast smells like pancakes and powdered milk. At the table, two boys argue over syrup, then laugh. It's small, it's human, it's everything. Around them, counselors walk a careful line, teaching fairness without preaching politics, equality without losing the camp's easy humor. Integration, it turns out, is learned best between bites of breakfast and splashes in the lake. Later that week, the boys split into teams for a scavenger hunt. They name themselves the Pioneers and the Trailblazers. By the time the hunt ends, they're muddy, bruised, and indistinguishable from each other. No one remembers who found more clues. Everyone remembers who fell in the creek. Across the country, other YMCA camps are doing the same, quietly integrating, quietly redefining who belongs under the same roof. The Y becomes a training ground for inclusion before schools or churches dare follow. Civil rights doesn't just happen in marches. Sometimes it happens in a canoe. The movement reaches beyond race. By the late 1960s, camps open to kids from new immigrant families, children with disabilities, and even those whose parents can't afford the full fee. "No child turned away" becomes an unofficial motto. That might sound ordinary now, but in its time, it's radical compassion disguised as policy. You sit in on a counselor meeting one afternoon. The camp director, a wiry woman named Lois Bennett, speaks softly but firmly. This place isn't just recreation anymore. It's democracy in practice. Around her, young staff members nod, some in uniforms, from Peace Corps training others barefoot from the lake. They believe her. Evening brings the council fire, still the heart of every Y camp. But tonight, instead of hymns or patriotic oaths, the campers tell stories about fairness. One girl stands and says, "My brother's at a protest in Selma. He told me courage is contagious." Another adds, "My dad says we're all supposed to be good citizens." I think that means listening. The fire pops approvingly, like punctuation from the universe. It isn't always smooth. Some parents write angry letters. One even complains that camps are no place for politics. But the Y holds its ground, replying with polite stubbornness. Our mission has always been moral growth through fellowship. This is fellowship. In 1968, the YMCA adopts a new slogan, for all. It's brief, brave, and prophetic. For all means every race, every faith, every background. It means the same bunk beds that once separated kids by color now mix them by chance. It means that when they sing around the fire, the harmonies come from voices that history once tried to keep apart. Meanwhile, music itself is changing. The old hymns give way to folk songs, If I Had a Hammer Blowin' in the Wind, This Little Light of Mine. Kids who grew up hearing protests on the radio now hear them echoing across the lake disguised as campfire sing-alongs. The line between recreation and revolution keeps getting thinner. At one camp in Michigan, the counselors start a new tradition, Unity Day. Instead of competitions, the entire camp works together to build a footbridge over a stream that splits the property. When they finish, they carve into the wood, one camp, one family. The bridge still stands decades later, creaking with history, but unbroken. That summer, you walk the trail at dusk, watching campers play tag between the pines. Their laughter rises and fades like wind chimes. You can't tell which ones are black, white, rich, or poor. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it finally doesn't define them. When the stars appear, the counselors gather for one last song. The guitars are out of tune. The voice is uneven, but the feeling is flawless. You lie back in the grass, listening, and realize something simple and extraordinary. The YMCA didn't just integrate summer camps, it integrated hope. And hope, once it learns how to sing, never goes quiet again. The 1970s arrive with the smell of bug spray, sunscreen, and rebellion. The world has traded protest signs for bell-bottoms, and even the YMCA, once a monument of discipline and hymns, starts to loosen its laces. The phrase moral formation is quietly replaced by something simpler, more democratic fun. You're back at camp, but it feels different now. The cabins are painted in bright colors, teal orange and sunshine yellow. Counselors wear tie-dye shirts instead of uniforms. Someone brought a guitar, someone else a frisbee, and nobody seems to remember the word curfew. The morning still begins with a bugle, but the call sounds more like jazz than a command. Breakfast is eggs, toast, and laughter. A counselor flips pancakes while humming a Beatles tune. There's still a prayer, sure, but now it's brief and open-ended. Let's be thankful for the trees, the sun, and each other. It's not about converting souls anymore. It's about connecting them. The new Y camps are shaped by the spirit of the decade ecology equality expression. Out go the marching drills and moral lectures. In come ropes, courses rock climbing, and nature hikes that double as philosophy lessons. Instead of memorizing Bible verses, kids learn how to pitch tents and talk about feelings. Instead of lectures on purity, they're asked how they can make the world kinder. You tag along with a group on a hike through the woods. The counselor, barefoot and bearded, leads the way, quoting Thoreau between mosquito slaps. Nature, he says, isn't a sermon. It's an invitation. The kids nod, pretending to understand. One quietly eats a granola bar and whispers, "This is way better than Sunday school." By midday, you're at the new ropes course, a jungle of cables and wooden planks strung between towering pines. The air buzzes with nervous laughter. The counselor clips a girl into a harness, looks her in the eye, and says, "Trust the rope. Trust yourself." She hesitates, breathes, and steps off the platform. The group cheers as she makes it across. This is what faith looks like now. Not obedience, but courage. Elsewhere, the camp introduces co-ed programs for the first time. Boys and girls share activities, compete on the same teams, and occasionally write songs together for talent night. The adults worry, but the kids don't seem to care. They're too busy building rafts and arguing about who gets the canoe first. For the Y, this quiet shift is revolutionary. Once a gendered world of manly virtue, the camp has evolved into something beautifully human. Evenings are electric. Campfires now come with guitars, drums, and a chorus of untrained voices singing everything from John Denver to Simon and Garfunkel. Someone starts a tradition called Sharing Circle, where campers take turns talking about the best moment of their day. One kid says, "I climbed the high ropes." Another says, "I didn't get homesick." A third says, "I think I found a friend." The counselors nod proud. This is exactly what the YMCA wanted: growth, without preaching empathy, without shame. The theology is gone, but the spirit remains. There's also a new word floating around camp: environmentalism. The oil crisis, pollution, and Earth Day have turned conservation into a moral cause. Camps start planting trees, cleaning lakes, teaching kids about ecosystems. The motto, Body, Mind, Spirit, quietly expands to include planet. You find a sign by the dining hall that reads, "Take only pictures, leave only footprints." It's simple and it sticks. Of course, the 1970s also bring awkward moments. Disco music blares from the camp radio. The director experiments with trust exercises that mostly result in people falling on each other. A counselor tries yoga by the lake and accidentally rolls into the water. But there's joy in the imperfection, freedom even. For once, camp isn't about control, it's about discovery. You wander down to the dock at sunset. The water reflects streaks of orange and gold, and the air smells faintly of charcoal and lakeweed. A few campers skip stones while 2 others share a flashlight reading poetry to each other. Someone nearby strums, leaving on a jet plane. You can't tell if they're off key or if that's just the wind. As night falls, the counselors light the fire. There's no sermon, no speech, just a simple chant that's become tradition. We are one flame, many sparks. The kids join in their voices, low and rhythmic, until the woods hum with warmth. It's clear now that the YMCA has changed again. The faith of their founders has turned into something gentler. Belief in people, belief in possibility. These kids don't talk about saving souls. They talk about saving the planet, or each other, or just this perfect night. You lean back, eyes on the stars, and realize the wildest thing of all. For an organization that started with strict rules, the Y has finally learned to trust chaos and found grace hiding inside it. By the time the 1990s roll around, the world has gone digital. But the woods haven't noticed. Somewhere beyond the buzzing modems and city lights, the YMCA camps are still waking to the smell of pine and the sound of sneakers slapping dew-covered grass. Yet the mission has changed again. The Y isn't just raising Christian gentlemen or citizens of character anymore. It's trying to raise kids who can breathe in a world that never stops talking. You arrive at camp on opening day, watching minivans unload an army of anxious faces. The parents look more nervous than the children. "No phones allowed," says a counselor, cheerfully collecting devices in a plastic bin. A few kids stare at their pagers like they've just lost a limb. "Trust me," the counselor adds, "you'll thank us by Wednesday." The cabins haven't changed much: wooden bunks, creaky floors, faint smells of bug spray and sunscreen. But the kids inside have. They come from suburbs now, not factories. They've seen cartoons about outer space, not sermons about virtue. They've never had to chop wood to keep warm, but they can code a computer before breakfast. The challenge isn't toughness anymore, it's attention. That's what the new YMCA camps try to teach: how to unplug, unwind, wind, and rediscover silence. Morning announcements talk about digital detox long before that phrase becomes trendy. You don't have to check in, the director says at orientation. You just have to show up. The activities reflect the new philosophy. There's still archery and swimming, but now also meditation by the lake, team-building obstacle courses, and something called confidence hikes, where groups walk in silence for an hour to listen to the woods. Some kids roll their eyes. Others end up loving it. One camper writes in his journal, "It's weird how the trees talk when you stop talking over them." You tag along on a ropes course one afternoon. A shy girl hesitates at the top of a climbing wall, hands trembling. Her group chants her name until she reaches the top, gasping, grinning, unstoppable. That's what the Y calls success now. Not perfection, but participation. Evenings bring campfire circles, but they've grown more reflective. Instead of hymns or protest songs, it's acoustic guitars and honest talk. "What was your hardest moment this week?" asks a counselor named Sharon, sitting cross-legged by the fire. One boy admits he's scared of going home. Another says he's never had friends who don't tease him. The group listens, nodding, passing around a flashlight as a talking stick. No one interrupts. No one laughs. When they're done, Sharon smiles softly. That, she says, is what belonging sounds like. In a decade obsessed with screens and sound bites, the YMCA camps rediscover the ancient rhythm of listening. The food's better now. Grilled cheese instead of mystery stew, and the gear more modern: foam mattresses, solar lanterns, biodegradable soap. But the spirit feels older, almost nostalgic. A banner in the dining hall reads, "Body, mind, and spirit for all." You realize those 4 words are the Y's entire evolution, stretched across a century, from faith to fitness, from community to compassion. By the 2000s, the Y begins running family camps where parents and children share cabins. It's less strict, more communal: canoe races in the morning, nature art in the afternoon, karaoke by night. One father tells you, "When I came here as a kid, we learned survival. Now we learn connection." He laughs. Both are still useful. Meanwhile, the counselors, now trained in psychology and youth development, teach mindfulness, conflict resolution, even empathy workshops. Teamwork isn't just about building rafts anymore, one explains. It's about building trust. Still, there's chaos, as there should be. One kid falls in the lake chasing a frog. Another paints her name on the wrong canoe. Someone's shoe ends up in the campfire by accident. The counselors handle it with patience and jokes. That's the Y's superpower. No matter how the world changes, camp remains perfectly imperfect. As night falls, you wander down to the lake. Fireflies blink over the water like slow-moving pixels. A group of campers are lying on the dockheads, tilted toward the stars. One of them points up and asks, "What's that one called?" The counselor answers, "That's Vega, the brightest star in Lyra. The Greeks said it was a harp string played by the gods." The kids stare, quiet for once. Maybe it's the first silence they've had in months. Somewhere in that stillness, you realize what the YMCA has truly built: not just a place to learn skills, but a place to remember stillness in a noisy age. For generations, the Y taught morality, then patriotism, then equality. Now it teaches something even rarer: how to breathe. The campfire crackles behind you, laughter echoing across the trees. Tomorrow they'll pack up and go home, back to screens and traffic and endless alerts. But tonight, under the same stars their great-grandparents once sang beneath, They're simply campers, unplugged, unhurried alive. If you listen closely at dawn, you can still hear them. The ghosts of every laugh, prayer, and splash echoing through the pines. It's early morning at a modern YMCA camp, the kind that's been redesigned a dozen times but still smells like sunscreen and damp earth. The cabins now have Wi-Fi, the canoes are fiberglass, and the mess hall serves almond milk next to scrambled eggs. But when the bell rings, the sound is the same one that woke boys in 1885 and girls in 1912. You can almost hear their footsteps layered under the new ones, like time itself is marching in circles. You step outside the mist, curling over the lake. Across the water, a counselor leads a group of sleepy teenagers in yoga. Another shouts encouragement at the rock wall. A smaller group sits quietly on the dock, journaling for the mindfulness morning. It's less about religion now, more about reflection. But you can feel the same heartbeat pulsing through it all. The YMCA's old belief that being outdoors can make you a better human. Inside the dining hall, the walls are lined with photos, black and white portraits of campers from decades past. Boys in suspenders, girls in braids, counselors with stern mustaches and bright smiles. A handwritten note under one photo reads, Camp Dudley, 1895, Faith Fund Fellowship. Another says, Camp Geneva, 1913, Strong in Spirit. Someone's added a sticky note next to it, in a different handwriting, still true. The breakfast line buzzes with chatter. A camper talks about her science project. Another explains how her grandmother used to come to this same camp in the 1950s. She met my grandpa at the canoe race, she says proudly. You realize what that means? Entire families have grown from these lakes generations, shaped by tents, campfires, and accidental love stories. After breakfast, the counselors lead Interfaith Circle. The name has changed, but the idea is old as the Y itself. Pause, breathe, and be grateful. Today's theme is kindness. One camper says he's grateful for new friends who didn't judge. Another says, I didn't know people could be this nice without Wi-Fi. The group laughs, but quietly, because it's true. When the session ends, you walk toward the old chapel trail, now renamed Legacy Path. Each stone along the walkway is engraved with a name, former campers, counselors, even founders. There's Sumner F. Dudley, the man who started it all with nothing but a lake and a dream of moral clarity. There's Mary Rockwell Hook, who gave girls their first glimpse of freedom beneath the stars. There's Pop Winters, who fed Depression-era kids with faith and stew. Their names are part of the forest now. Halfway down the trail, you stop at a clearing where today's campers are planting trees. We call this rewilding, a counselor explains. For every tree that falls in a storm, we plant two. The kids dig laugh-smeared dirt across their cheeks. The legacy of service, the Y's oldest moral code, has become environmental now. But the message hasn't changed. Leave the world a little better than you found it. In the afternoon, you visit the lake one last time. The air hums with life canoes, gliding oars, splashing the smell of sunscreen and wet wood. You think of all the other days, exactly like this one. 1904, 1945, 1968, 1999. The world outside changed 1,000 times, but here the rhythm held. Later, the final campfire of the season gathers everyone in a wide circle. The counselors light the flames, and the children's faces glow orange. There's laughter, then music, then silence. One counselor, a young man with freckles and a guitar, speaks softly. We always say goodbye to the summer. But maybe the summer never really leaves us. It just waits here in the trees. The group sings one last song. The lyrics aren't religious, but they sound like prayer all the same, about friendship, courage, and the way every goodbye plants a seed for the next reunion. The sound rises into the branches, bounces off the water, and disappears into the night. You stay after the others have gone, watching the embers fade. In that quiet, you can almost hear every generation layered together. The Victorian boys in wool socks, the girls of 1912 paddling canoes, the soldiers who wrote letters home, the teenagers who sang for peace, the kids who unplugged just long enough to find themselves again. The YMCA never built an empire of faith. It built something gentler, an ecosystem of memory. And those memories of laughter, struggle, discovery have shaped millions without ever needing to preach a word. The lake laps softly at the shore. A single firefly drifts by. The night folds itself around the camp, and you feel a calm older than history itself. Somewhere far away, another bell rings, calling another group to wake and begin again. Because that's the secret, the Y never really ends. It just keeps teaching one sunrise at a time. The fire has gone quiet now, leaving only the soft hiss of the lake and the slow rhythm of crickets. You close your eyes and think of all the laughter, footsteps, and campfire songs that built the world you live in, each one a heartbeat from the YMCA's long, gentle story. Maybe the trees remember it best, generations of kids learning to be brave, kind, and human beneath their shade. The night air feels warm, steady, timeless. You breathe in, let the echoes fade, and drift off somewhere between memory and dream where the campfire never really goes out.